Welcome to Lesche, a podcast on new ideas in ancient Greek studies. I'm your host, Johanna Hanning, and I'm a classics professor at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, where a blizzard just dropped over 3 feet of snow on us and set a new single-storm snowfall record. When I was in college, I remember hearing some classics grad students talking about Martin West's then new Teubner edition of the Iliad. The first volume had come out in 1998 and the second in 2000, the year that I started my undergrad. The grad students there were talking about the Teubner in a way that made it seem like a tabloid scandal. Why was it so scandalous? Well, West had gone and bracketed the entirety of Book 10, the Doloneia. Those brackets signaled his view that Book 10 of the Iliad was not an authentic part of the poem. Ever since antiquity, the Doloneia has been something of a headache for Homeric scholars. That book of the poem recounts a midnight scouting mission in the Trojan camp that is undertaken by Diomedes and Odysseus. In the course of it, they capture and kill a Trojan spy named Dolon, then go on to slaughter the sleeping Thracian king Rhesus and his men, and steal Rhesus's famous white horses. Homer's readers have long noted that something just feels different about this book and this episode. The tone, the vocabulary, and the pacing seem distinct from the rest of the Iliad. Since antiquity, there's been an idea in circulation that this was actually a later edition by a different poet. One of the arguments has been that Book 10 can be removed entirely without affecting the plot progression of the surrounding books. Another issue is the nature of the heroism on display in the book, which is really hardly heroic. The Doloneia is centered around ambush and stealth. There are no Aristeas here. What we get is the interrogation and execution of a prisoner, Dolon, and the slaughter of defenseless sleeping enemies, namely King Rhesus and his men. Odysseus is depicted with a level of ruthlessness and cunning that feels more like his portrayals in 5th century tragedies than the Odysseus of the epic tradition. And yet, there are also reasons, really pretty good ones, to see the Doloneia as an important and even organic part of the Iliad. My guest today, Christos C. Tsagalis, will be laying those reasons out. Iliad 10 is a topic of both Christos' monograph, the Homeric Doloneia, Evolution and Shaping of Iliad 10, which came out with Oxford in 2024, and his chapter in Jonathan Reedy's recent edited volume, The Oxford Critical Guide to Homer's Iliad, which, as it happens, also came out with Oxford in 2024. During this episode of the podcast, you'll be hearing from Christos about his idea that an earlier phase of the Doloneia, what he calls the Hector version, actually had Odysseus and Diomedes setting out on a mission to find and kill no one but Hector himself. And by the end of the episode, you just might find yourself convinced that the eerie midnight raid we do get in Book 10 is right where it belongs. Christos C. Tsagalis is professor of ancient Greek literature at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. He is ordinal member of the Academia Europaea, corresponding member of the Cypriot Academy of Sciences, Letters, and Arts, and member of the governing board of the Center for the Greek Language in Thessaloniki. He is the co-editor of Brill's Yearbook of Ancient Greek Epic, the series of monographs Key Perspectives on Classical Research, that's with de Gruyter, assistant editor of the series Trends in Classics supplementary volumes, also with de Gruyter, and member of the scientific board of the series of classical commentaries Aris and Phillips. He specializes in early Greek epic poetry. Just a quick reminder that I have put some bibliography in the show notes for this episode, and also that Lesche is on Instagram at Lesche Podcast, and that's where you can find announcements of new episodes. Now, I'd like to welcome into the Lesche Christos C. Tsagalis. The next voice you'll be hearing is his.
Some years ago, I was selected as one of the commentators for the new commentary on the Iliad by the Lorenzo Valla Foundation, and I was assigned books 9 to 12. So that was how it all began, because when I started working on Book 10, everything seemed problematic. Of course, this is a notorious issue concerning the Iliad. Book 10 has been considered by many scholars, not all scholars, but by many scholars, as a major interpolation in addition to the fixed Iliad, whatever this means. And so I became engaged in writing a commentary not just in the other books, but also on Book 10. And when you write a commentary, you have to deal basically with everything. And the more you read about this book, the more you research, you realize that there are a lot of interesting questions that need to be asked. The new questions and approaches perhaps from a different angle. If one looks at the history of the research in Book 10, he or she will see there is a list of arguments concerning the question of authenticity. But of course, questions of authenticity are based on criteria, and here the crucial issue is reliable criteria. And of course, in the field of humanities, I don't want to say especially in classics, but in humanities in general, people have different views about which are the reliable criteria. So that's how I started thinking about Book 10. Then I taught for 2 or 3 years, a seminar in the university, and I was so fortunate at least one of those years. I had a group of students who were they had two big advantages. The first one, they were fascinated by this dark book, this night book, Book 10. And the second one was that they were not afraid to suggest whatever came to their mind, which sometimes shocked me, but it proved to be very helpful. It was a very engaging and stimulating experience, at least for me. I hope for them too. So that's how I got involved in this project.
Could you say a little bit about just why Book 10 has been considered this kind of problem book for so long? What about it is so unusual or exceptional?
Yes. Well, if I assume the position of those who think it's a major interpolation, I think to begin with that they have some strong weapons on their side. Well, the first one is that we have a scholion, an ancient scholion, which says that Book 10 was not composed by Homer, but it was composed by Pisistratus and was added to the Iliad. That is a scholion, a unique scholion that we have on that. So we have some. Well, we may discuss this. That scholion has been discussed, of course, but that's at least an ancient piece of information. Then the second one is that people have argued. That's not my personal opinion, but people have argued that you can omit Book 10 from the Iliad, and nothing happens. Nothing will happen. I mean, the plot will continue as it is. Because at the end of Book 9, among many other things, the Achaeans refer to Diomedes tells Agamemnon that when the night is over, at dawn, he should lead an attack, mass-scale attack against the Trojans in the plain, which is exactly what happens at the beginning of Book 11. So this Book 9, end of Book 9, beginning of Book 11, it ties very well. So that's another big argument. The third one is that there's a person who features only in Book 10. He never speaks. He's basically asleep, exhausted from the journey, coming from Thrace with his troops to help the Trojans, and he's killed by Diomedes in his sleep. The two spies, Diomedes and Odysseus, steal his horses. The Achaeans are amazed when they see these horses. And then these horses are put at under, and nothing happens with them. We don't hear about them ever again. Especially, that's another argument put forward by those who say it is a major interpolation in Book 23, where the context could allow or would allow Diomedes to use the splendid horses of Rhesus to take part in the chariot race. So these are some of these arguments. This kind of argumentation has been considerably enhanced when Georg Danek published in 1988 his Studien to Dolonie. And I say enhanced because Danek is, first of all, an exceptional Homerist. Number two, he's well-versed in the oral theory. And so he approached the question from that point of view. And he put forward a number of arguments by means of which he tried to explain how we, on the one hand, have a person who is well-versed in epic composition, but he cannot be the same person as the composer of the rest of the Iliad, because Danek believes that there is one composer of the rest of the Iliad, namely Homer. So he also tackled the issue of some linguistic peculiarities or oddities, the construction of speeches, the problem of the unusual clothing of the two spies, Diomedes and Odysseus, and other matters. Once his book was published, it was an immediate success. Years later, the now, let's say, school of Homeric studies, in particular Casey Duret and Mary Ebbott, I think this is 2010, they published together a book on the Poetics of ambush. So they approached the whole issue from a different angle. They discussed a considerable part of Donne's arguments, and they argued that what we are dealing here with is a special theme, which is the ambush theme, which stands in contrast to the theme of regular warfare. And this is a rare look that we have at this theme of ambush, which seems to be inappropriate for Iliadic heroes, not heroes of the Trojan saga or the Trojan war tradition. And of course, we all know that the two particular heroes who excel in this spying mission who turns into an ambush, Diomedes and Odysseus, do appear as a pair in the Cypriot tradition. They undertake joint missions. They drown Palamedes and in the Cypria. They get inside Troy in the Little Iliad, and they steal the Palladium. So what they do here in the Iliad is not something which is against the typical things that these two heroes do in the larger tradition of the Trojan War. So they approach the whole issue from, the paralord and the basis of the paralord hypothesis, and the Nagy approach to the interpretation of Homeric epics, and they argued that this is an integral part of the tradition of the Iliad, of the Iliadic tradition, in the sense that hardcore oralists like them give to this term. So these were the two major approaches. There is another one which I intentionally left for the end, although it is the earliest one, 1964, Bernard Fenwick. Fenwick is basically known for his two excellent books on one on the Iliad and one on the Odyssey, but he's published this short study in the Collection d'Atomos, which is about Iliad 10 and the Risses, and the Pseudo-Euripidean Risses. And Fenwick has suggested there that Iliad 10, as we have it, is a modification of an older story in which, let me put it like that, an older story in which the two spies, Diomedes and Odysseus, intended to kill Hector, which is something that, comes up in the Pseudo-Euripidean Risses. They never kill Hector, of course, because it's against the factum canon. They cannot kill Hector. And so she analyzed this. That was his approach. Some people thought it's a very interesting suggestion. Others were very much against it. I think that approach has something to recommend it, but not in the way Fenwick did it. Just to keep the balance here, because I said in the beginning that one of the arguments of those who think that the individual manipulation is the ancient scholium, there is another ancient scholium, and this time by Aristarchus, who of course is a major figure, is that the intention of the spies is to kill Hector. So the scholiastic tradition is very important, the scholia vetera are very important with respect to tackling this issue. And let me just say that, the idea of approaching an enemy and not being able to kill him because of a divine intervention is not something that is against what we should expect to find in an archaic Greek epic. So these are the three major, I would say, studies. I mentioned them at the very beginning of the foreword of my book, which have been constantly in my mind while researching this book.
So broadly speaking, if we start with the question of authenticity and maybe leave aside for the moment the question of the so-called Hector version, but if we start with the question of authenticity, where broadly do you come down on that?
Well, the question of authenticity is based on an assumption, and the assumption is that the Iliad has been written by Homer.
Right. There's a question of what does authenticity even mean, I suppose, right?
Exactly. And once again, we are caught in the midst of, the meaning of various terms that we use. But let's say that authenticity, there is a common denominator between those who think that Homer is the author of the Iliad, the poet of the Iliad, and those who think of an Iliadic tradition. That is some sort of authorship, right? It's the Iliadic tradition and not the Odyssean tradition, for example. That is some sort of compromise, at least for our discussion. My point of view is that the Iliad tradition has been formed and shaped in the course of time during the archaic period. And that's what I think about the Odyssean tradition as well. At the same time, I think that both these traditions, at least these two are big traditions, display a sophistication, a self-awareness, and a depth that allows them to be not only in complete control of what they do, but also to shape themselves in dialogue with other traditions, other stories. So that's my take on authenticity. And within that, I argued in the book that the Rhesus episode, which is basically the second part of the Dolonie. The Dolonie has two parts, basically. One is go and find information about what Hector has in mind. That's the plan of Nestor. They go, but at the same time, in the Trojan camp, Hector is trying to find a spy to do the same thing. Now, both aims seem to be a bit ridiculous because, the Trojan army is in the plain during the night. They have pushed back the Greeks to their camp. So what do the Greeks have in mind? They will try to defend themselves or take their ships and leave. What is the point of finding out what they have in mind? When dawn comes, the Trojans will attack.
There's no mystery.
There's no mystery. What Hector has in mind to destroy the Greeks? He has camped in the plain. Yeah. He has camped in the plain. And my observation is that this is an adaptation of a real plan. This is a theme that comes consistently from the earlier books of the Iliad. It's repeated and repeated. Now that Achilles is not fighting, there is Hector on his own. Nobody can defeat him. Nobody can stop him. And the whole thing comes to a climax in Book 9, where they basically acknowledge that, and they go and beg Achilles to return. Only you. But he doesn't return. And so, what is the alternative? The alternative is kill Hector when he's sleeping in the night. That would be a reasonable plan for the Achaeans. And actually, there's a lot of information in Book 10 which points to that direction. The Trojans send their own spy, Dolon. The Greeks arrest him, and instead of moving forward to acquire information, when they hear about Rhesus, they suddenly turn against Rhesus. They forget Hector at all. So there are two plots here, basically. One is they must have had a real reason for infiltrating the Trojan camp, which is not information at all. It would be to kill Hector. But then, how do I think about that sort of version? They would have gone into the camp. They would have arrested Dolon, which he would have told them where Hector is sleeping, as it happens in Iliad. And when they approach to kill Hector, obviously Agamemnon would tell them that this cannot happen now. He will die later, but in some other way. You have to leave, which is something we already find in previous books of the Iliad. When there is an intervention, and they would have killed him. If not situations, they would have killed him if it was not for God X who intervened. So that's the pattern that is used, and that would explain why they went there, they left, nothing happened. But for some reason, as the tradition evolved, it was realized that it's not extremely interesting or effective. Because the spies seem a bit ridiculous. They go next to Hector, but they don't kill him. So they have to achieve something which would give them courage the next day to launch a huge attack. That was already a decision made at the end of Book 9, but there was no courage for that. The courage would come when they achieved something major. And the major is to kill someone. A big Trojan hero or a supporter of the Trojans. And now the problem comes, but who can they kill who is so big at this point? And the answer is nobody. They cannot kill Hector. They cannot kill Paris, of course. They cannot kill anyone who is major. So we need to bring one just for one reason, to be killed.
To kill him off.
For no other reason. What the analytics, the analysts regarded as a problem, that Rhesus comes, is killed, and nothing happens. It's the reason he came into the plot. He was brought into the plot. He was brought into the plot for one reason, to be killed. Why? Because in this way, the Achaeans would come back at the end of Book 10, which is what happens, and the army would see its courage renewed, new hopes, and the attack would be more smoothly presented at the beginning of Book 11. So that kind of change resulted in putting Hector aside, not in completely erasing him from the plot, because you see, one of the basic problems is you can't have Hector and Rhesus together, and you can see that in the Cindu of Euripides and Rhesus, how bad it is when you have them together. Because Hector is number one, and when Rhesus comes, he's presented as being better than number one, but that is not taken nicely by any audience. I mean, you can't have someone better than Achilles, you can't have someone better than Hector. I mean, you have Hector being number one, Achilles being number one. That is almost fact and canon. That is basic knowledge and basic expectation from the audience. So I see that's why the subtitle of the book is Evolution and Shaping of Iliad 10, because I see a process of evolution and shaping of this story. Something which is also very interesting, and this was brought up by Fanny pretty nicely, are the two versions, what he calls the Pindar version and the Oracle version of the Rhesus story, which are reported by Scholia. So Fanny too is using ancient material. The Pindaric version is a version according to which Rhesus comes to support the Trojans. He performs very well. He kills lots of Greeks. He has an Aristei, and then here on Athena advise the Greeks to do what they should do, and Diomedes and Odysseus will go in the night and kill Rhesus. Now the Oracle story, the Oracle version is that there was an oracle, that if Rhesus came and he drank water, he drinks water from the Scamander and his horses graze at its banks, both he and the horses will be invincible. So he has to be killed the very first night, not later on. And Hellenic has deeply studied both versions, and he has shown, I think, pretty convincingly, how parts and elements of these versions, or earlier versions, have left traces in the plots of Iliad 10. So there is also another aspect that is not so much discussed. It's a bit discussed at the end of Danek's book. And it's a practical issue. You see, people talk about interpolations, but here we are talking about the interpolation of an entire book. We're not talking about the interpolation of a line or a group of lines. We're talking about the interpolation of an entire book. That's number one that I'd like to discuss. And number two is the place of the so-called interpolated book. It's not at the end. It's almost in the middle. Now, let's just think about it. If we adopt the approach of the interpolation, we have to assume that it is the work of a single person who interpolated. Who wrote Book 10? Who wrote Book 10? Someone. Okay. So this someone wanted to interpolate it. How would he interpolate it? He would have because these people believe in written copies of the Iliad, which all these people use. I mean, they compose by writing, that's what I think. So he would have in his house a list of papyrus rolls with the entire Iliad. And he wanted to place this composition of his in this particular spot, after Book 9. So he would rewrite everything after Book 9, so that he has a complete series of roles with his new interpolated Iliad with Book 10 at that particular point. And now he has his own copy at home. I mean, how important is this person who is able to outdo other copies, written copies. I mean, who is he? And impose his own version so consistently and so successfully from such an early date that in the 5th and the 4th century, they are referring to Dolon in the Iliad, which means the Doloneia, so an Iliad with Dolon. I mean, this major interpolation at the practical level and also at the level of being concerning regarding the issue of immediate and immense success to an extent that he, seems to me that he overshadowed the rest of the tradition, seems to me a technical problem that is not, we cannot easily dismiss. The practical aspect of interpolation, yes.
Could we go back a little bit and maybe talk about the relationship that you see between Book 10 and Book 9? Because one of the things that you argue for is a kind of mirroring, and that's an important term for you, between Book 9 and 10, that in some ways is comparable to what we see between Book 1 and 2. So could you speak a little bit about the relationship between 9 and 10? Because, I'm no Homerist, but I do remember that there was an idea out there that there could have been a sort of choose your own adventure version of things where either 9 is the hinge to 11 or 10 sort of substitutes in as the hinge to 11, so that 9 and 10 might be, according to some older ideas, interchangeable. But could you speak a little bit about how you see the relationship between these books?
Yes. I think that the first person who said that let us think of the possibility of switching the order of 9 and 10 and putting 10 first and 9 second. So what he said at the end of 9 is continued by the beginning of 11, which is the argument of those who think that 10 is an interpolation. I think that the 9 and 10 in the way we have them work nicely. Why? Because what is the situation in Book 9? We have one great hero, Achilles, who is basically unwilling to assist the army. The army is desperate. They send 3 ambassadors, an eloquent one like Odysseus, the greatest defensive warrior, Ajax, and even a person who is close to him sentimentally, Phoenix. And he doesn't change his mind. Agamemnon offers basically everything. I mean, he's even often asking him to become his son-in-law. Women, cities, gifts. So this extremely generous offer is made just because he's going to say no. Because he thinks in his own mind that Agamemnon is trying to bribe him. And so he won't say yes. So this person seems to be interested only in himself or in his own personal way of interpreting the heroic code. And he says no. What is the situation in Book 10? Everybody is willing. Everybody is willing to participate in the spy mission. When the plan is put forward, there are various volunteers. So the one thing is Achilles who thinks of himself, and then the others who think of the army. The second thing is that this spirit of collaboration is preparing very well what is going to happen in Book 11 when they are going to attack massively in the camp. And now, remember what happened at the end of Book 8. At the end of Book 8, Hector has pushed back the Greeks and he has campaigned with his troops in the plain. The end of Book 8 is a beautiful scene. The campfires light the sky, and Hector, and something imminent, something big is going to happen. And then his long night starts at the end of Book 8, which continues until the end of Book 10. And what happens during that terrible night? They beg Achilles, he refuses. They try to, in the older version, kill Hector. They don't, or they kill Rhesus. And so I think there is a connection between 9 and 10. Agamemnon is also in character drawing. Agamemnon is poorly presented in Book 10. He tells the Greeks, let's go in the beginning of Book 9. I have failed. And then Diomedes takes the floor and he says, you take your army and go back. I and Sthenelus will stay here until the bitter end. And then what happens in Book 10? Agamemnon cannot sleep because he's so worried of the situation. And he goes to Menelaus and they take action. So Agamemnon is somehow restored, and he needs to be restored because who is going to lead the attack at the beginning of 11? Agamemnon. And it's so important that, we have a big ekphrasis. He has his own ekphrasis on his weapons, the presentation of his weapons when he attacks the army. So if we take out Book 10, we have Diomedes at the end of Book 9 telling Agamemnon everything failed. It was a mistake even to ask Achilles and to give him all the gifts. When the night is over, you get out in the plain and you attack the Trojans. And then he would attack the Trojans. This doesn't work pretty nicely. But then if in Book 10 we see an Agamemnon who cares for the army, who thinks that we need to do something before the attack, then this paves the way for his magisterial role, leading role at the beginning of Book 11. So the idea that we come back to our initial discussion about reliable criteria, the idea of what Book 10 is doing at this specific place brings forward a number of interesting issues. And if I may add, another aspect that I tried to discuss in the book are some intratextual associations, some verbal resonances between Book 10 and other books. And I try to show that some of these resonances go back to the previous book and some go forward. Now, here, backward and forward are not equal, and I'll explain why. Because if you have verbal associations referring to previous books, then the argument was, and it was actually made by certain people, that the composer of Book 10, who is not Homer, it's another person, tries to make connections to the previous events. But if there are verbal resonances which prepare, which give added weight, which create a semantical surplus to later expressions used in books that follow Book 10, then we are dealing with someone who is displaying a capability for creating cohesion that really shows us that he's doing the same thing that Homer is doing, basically. So
it's like a very complicated bank heist in reverse. Yes. Very complicated conspiracy to insert something rather than take it away. That sounds like quite a lot of work.
Yes, and the idea, that person, I try to emphasize, and I did that, in a rather, let's say, putting a lot of emphasis about the ability of this person to create a major interpolation and to convince, and to have his own copy take over the entire tradition. And again, this must have been a very special person. He can create associations with the entire book. He's well versed, of course, in composing. And somehow he's able to do all these things. I mean, it's not very economical.
It sounds like if he really did exist, you would very much like to meet him. And ask him a few questions.
And the question will be, how did you do it?
We've talked a bit now about the book as it appears in its textual and textualized form, but you also write quite a bit about what the distinct style of this book might reveal or what light it might shed on oral poetics as well. And specifically, you talk about this concept of oral indexing. So could you speak a little bit to, if we look at Book 10, about the evidence for the oral poetics at play in it?
Yes, well, I have to say that, as you probably know, and as our listeners know, a lot of ink has been used in recent years concerning questions of the kind of orality we are dealing with in Homer. And of course, there are different approaches to this issue. But recent work has shown that markers of allusion exist and are systematically used both in early Greek epic and in lyric poetry. And these markers of allusion are all over the place. They display a level of sophistication which is remarkable, but at the same time, in the case of Greek epic poetry, they show that there is an awareness of the kind of composition we're dealing with. And of course, this shows a mature tradition, a tradition that can look at itself and can evaluate itself with respect to certain other traditions, is certainly a mature tradition. Now, Book 10 does not display, in my view, anything different from the picture that we have in the rest of the epic. There is a moment, for example, when Odysseus smiles, ironically, when Dolonie reveals to him what Hector promised. Hector was looking for a spy, and he said, I'm going to give to the one who volunteers as a spy the best horses. And Dolonie, a nobody, says, I volunteer, and I want the horses of Achilles. Now, when Diomedes and Odysseus arrest Dolonie, and Dolonie tells them what Hector promised him, Odysseus smiles. And of course, this is a poetic gesture, because we know that in the continuation of the plot, Hector will fail. Dolonie will die, but Hector has promised with a certainty that is annoying, to give Dolonie the horses of Achilles, of the greatest hero. And he is so sure that he will give him the horses of Achilles. And what happens is that he won't get the horses of Achilles, even when he kills Patroclus. He kills Patroclus, he gets the armor of Achilles, the first armor of Achilles, but he doesn't get the horses which go back to the Achaean camp. And of course, these are the horses that are leading the chariot to which Achilles will attach the dead body, the corpse of Hector, and drag him back to the ships. So when Odysseus smiles, I think it's the Iliad that smiles at the same time. It's an ironic smile, about human vanity and aggression. Hector is taking for granted that he will defeat Achilles, and he will even steal his horses and give them to Dolonie. So this kind of, we know from Book 23, for example, that the Iliad uses this kind of pregnant smile as a way to make a pathological comment. Let me give you and our listeners, I think, an interesting example. In Book 23, in the funeral games for Achilles, which is the El Dorado of neo-analytical motifs, there is the two contestants are ready they disagree about something, and they're ready to fight. And Achilles intervenes, when he sees them disagreeing, he smiles, and he stops the quarrel. So Achilles is now in a position to do what he was not able to do in Book 1, where he started a quarrel, a strife with Agamemnon, a strife that goes through the entire poem. So when he smiles, it's the point of the Iliad that smiles at itself, how things have changed now, where we are now, that we can see what we did in the past. So Odysseus smiles because he doesn't know what is going on, what will happen, of course, but he may think, of course, that, how Hector can be sure to get the horses of Achilles, but at the same time, knowing what the plot will be, how the plot will unravel, the Iliad itself allows us to glimpse, at least for a second, at the vanity of a character like Hector, whose basically vanity will bring his own end, as he says in Book 22. So I think that, again, this is a typical example of the same kind of technique that we see at the rest of the poem. Again, as you nicely said, if I met this person who can close book 10, I would be very, very, very happy man. But I don't think that is exactly the right approach. My approach has been in researching and writing this book to try to tackle the problem of the book 10 by discussing how it was shaped in the form that we have it.
If there's a sense that book 9, if we take book 9, 10, 11, and this is the sequence, that book 9 represents a failure to persuade Achilles to rejoin the battle. And then we have a kind of triumph in book 10. That triumph, and this is something I've been really wanting to ask you, that triumph is achieved by pretty dodgy means. So we have reneging on the promise to not kill Dolon, and then we also have Rhesus and his men are essentially killed in their beds. So what do you make of what Book 10 suggests about the morality or ethical system of the poem? Where are we left at the end of it thinking about these, the actions of the heroes Diomedes and Odysseus?
I think that together with Book 10 is crucial for the development of the character of Diomedes. Diomedes is used in the Iliad as a second Achilles, starting from the end of Book 4, and of course in Book 5, his great Aristeia. He's a killing machine, like Achilles. He's the best aggressive warrior. Telamonian Ajax is the best defensive warrior. So he's huge in Book 5, and of course in Book 8, Hector is afraid about Diomedes. And there is a point when they prepare to come in the plain that Diomedes might organize a lochos, an ambush, and get inside the city when they are away. And this is said in Book 8. So Hector says, tell the old men and the women and the others to be alert, lest Diomedes does something like that. So Diomedes is developed as a second Achilles. And in Book 9, he plays the role of the second Achilles. He says, let's go out and fight. We won't need Achilles number 1, the first Achilles. As if he says, I am a new Achilles for you. I'll stay here until the bitter end. So Diomedes has excelled as a hero of regular warfare. And that's the argument of Dewey, which I accept. And Book 10 makes Diomedes excel in the alternative kind of warfare, which is the ambush warfare, as a spy and as an ambusher. And of course, this is important because in Book 11, Diomedes has been rewarded. And he will basically not fight after that until the end of the poem. He never fights until the end of the poem. The other main thing that he does is in Book 23, when he wins in the chariot race. So it's important to understand what Book 10 contributes to character drawing. And Diomedes achieves his climax. He comes to is well presented until the end of Book 10. Then the Iliad will leave him behind. And why will the Iliad leave him behind? That's also, I think, very interesting because it shows us the exquisite technique of the Iliad. Because slowly, from Book 11, the Iliad turns towards the story of Patroclus. At the end of Book 11, Nestor tells to Patroclus, go to Achilles, etc., etc., etc. There is a retardation, it takes a few books until this happens, and until we get to Book 16. But Diomedes eclipses when the story of Patroclus, which will lead to the return of Achilles, is brought to the fore. So Diomedes is important as long, and I think that's a lesson also for the Rhesus story, Diomedes is important as long as the plot has not decided to turn towards Patroclus, which will lead to the return of Achilles. That's why he's the second Achilles. So, Book 10, he's at the top. Then he's wounded, and he's left aside. So, wounding Diomedes is also very important, because we need him alive. He's going to be present in the sack of Troy, right? So, the moment the plot turns towards Patroclus and then Achilles, Diomedes won't be fighting. Because it's a bit unbearable to have both Diomedes and Achilles excel in the battlefield, as it is to have Hector and Rhesus. So what do we learn from the Iliad's treatment of Diomedes? What we see in the treatment of Rhesus. Diomedes is as was understood of Helen. Diomedes is one of the epigones who sacked Thebes. He's a hero of another tradition, of the Theban tradition, together with Tsagalis, his friend. They are two of the epigones. His father Tydeus, he's called all the time son of Tydeus. His father Tydeus was one of the seven who died in the first expedition against Thebes. He's an incomer, if that is the right word, to the story of the Trojan War. So he's important as a second Achilles when it is not fighting. When the story turns towards the aim, let's bring Achilles back, meaning the story of Patroclus, Diomedes has to be kept alive, so he's wounded and stays in his hut, just like Achilles, who was in his hut, because he was angry against Agamemnon. Rhesus comes into the plot for a specific reason, to be killed. Why? Because in this way, Diomedes will achieve the climax of his chaos at the end of Book 10. So I think the more we get involved, the more we get engaged with this kind of questions, we see how Book 10 solves a number of issues. Instead of seeing it as a problem, it is, I think, more rewarding to ask questions concerning the way it interacts with the rest of the plot.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation, Christos. I would like to end, traditionally here on the podcast, I've been asking guests, what if there's something beyond work, outside of work, that you have been reading or listening to or watching or doing that has been bringing you some joy lately. So do you have something you'd like to share?
Well, the other thing I'm doing that I'm enjoying quite a lot is be with my two daughters who are at school and trying to help them with those kind of courses that I can help. Gives me a great pleasure because it's unique. It's a unique experience for a father, and I really enjoy that.
That's a great answer. Well, thank you, Christos, so much for the book. I mean, it's such a fascinating topic. Fascinating book. Thank you so much. And thank you for the conversation. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Lesche podcast. And special thanks for their support of the podcast to the Brown University Department of Classics and the John Nicholas Brown Center for Advanced Study. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And we'd be grateful if you take a moment to rate the podcast and leave a review. It will help other listeners to find us. We look forward to you joining us again soon here in the Lesche.